Hey guys, welcome back to another impressions video, a long overdue impressions video on Final Fantasy Explorers on the Nintendo 3DS, a game that I beat very early this year, and in fact I included this game on my top games of 2016 list because I had a pretty good time with this game, and I found it to be a very enjoyable Monster Hunter light type of game. This is an action RPG that it's really geared towards the Final Fantasy fans, which is something that it's a little bit I guess a little bit of an irony because I can't consider myself a huge Final Fantasy fan because I have never beaten a mainline Final Fantasy game yet, which is, I know, something that it's on my to-do list, and I know it's kind of crazy considering Final Fantasy, it's a household name when it comes to the RPG genre. It's probably the most iconic and popular RPG series out there, and I still haven't beaten a mainline game, and I can probably amend that pretty soon. I know Final Fantasy XII Remaster is about to be released, and I did hear that that game is somewhat similar to Xenoblade Chronicles in terms of gameplay, and Xenoblade Chronicles is one of my favorite RPGs of all time, so I might finally break that spell, if you will. And I do have other Final Fantasy games here in my collection. I have 13, I have the 10 and 10-2 remasters, so yeah, I definitely need to break that spell. But here the irony is that in 2015 I beat Theatrhythm Curtain Call for the 3DS, which is another spin-off game that it's very, very geared towards the hardcore Final Fantasy crowd, because it has all the songs and all the songs from previous games and characters from previous games. And Explorers is the same thing. Well, it's a different genre, obviously. This is an action RPG, but some of the characters that you can summon later in the game when you get different spells are, you can summon Cloud and other classic Final Fantasy characters to aid you, defeating the monsters. And then the monsters that you face are bosses from previous games and whatnot. So a very fan service centric game towards the Final Fantasy crowd, which is something pretty cool. But yeah, I'm working my way backwards here, playing all these spin-offs that are geared towards fans. But hey, I did have a ton of fun with Curtain Call, and I had a pretty good amount of fun with Final Fantasy Explorers, which again, it's a quest-based action RPG, very similar to the Monster Hunter games in the sense that you take on upon a quest to defeat a boss or a monster, and once you do that, you get rewards. You get more money, more experience, and you can level up your character. You can buy new or upgrade your armor and weapons and whatnot. So it's a very addictive type of gameplay, and this game is actually the perfect, I guess, introduction or entry point if you guys are trying to get your feet wet in the Monster Hunter genre types of games, because this game is very forgiving, it's much easier to get into than the Monster Hunter games. So if you're looking into exploring that type of subgenre, if you will, this is a good place to start. And I was actually addicted. I just checked my my activity log just to see how long it took me, and it took me 23 hours and 26 minutes. That's how much activity I have on my 3DS activity log. And out of those 23 hours, I want to say that the first maybe 8 hours I was very, very addicted to this game. Like, I put those 8 hours in probably 2 different settings. It was just very fun. When you first start the game, you have to pick a job basically, and that's part of the fun, because you can always switch your jobs, and depending on the type of job that you pick, your combat is different and the abilities you learn are different. You start the game as a what is it? I think like a freelancer. Once you pass the tutorial stage, you are free to choose from different jobs, and you have your typical classes, like you have the dark mage, you have the white mage, you have knight, monk, paladin, and so forth. So I ended up choosing, I ended up exploring a little bit with using white mage, dark mage, but I did settle with monk, which is somewhat of a tough class because the monks, you basically use your fists in order to fight the monsters. So you have to be close to them at all times. But there are some abilities that you learn that are very useful. Myself, I found this. You learn this ability early in the game called counter. So if you time it right, not only do you block the attack from the enemies, but you also rebound some of that attack power from the enemies into them. You project their attacks onto them. So that was a very, very useful skill that I used throughout my playthrough as a monk. And again, you can change the classes, but it's very easy to pick one and settle down with one, because as you play, you unlock more abilities. You improve your character, you level it up. So technically, this game can have, as far as gameplay time, you can easily put 100 hours if you are into exploring different jobs and different classes and whatnot, and leveling up and unlocking all the abilities. There's a ton of content in that regard. Now, as far as the story, it's very minimal. The story is not very good in this game. You don't necessarily play this game for the story. You basically arrive at this island where there's a abundance in crystals, and there are different sectors that are trying to abuse the powers of the crystals, and different explorers that come to the island, because there are a lot of crystals and whatnot. So the story in this game it's pretty bad, pretty shallow. But the true attraction of this game here is the gameplay and just how fun the game is. However, I did mention that the first 8 to 10 hours were very addicting. I was very engaged in the game. But after that, a lot of the quests, they start getting repetitive. You start facing the same boss battles. You start going to the same regions in the island. So there's a lot of repetition when it comes to this game. And it's a little bit unfortunate. A lot of the enemies are reused. A lot of the assets are reused, the textures, the environments. And that's when the game starts becoming a little bit repetitive. So I wish the island that you explore was a little bit bigger. I wish there was a little bit more variety in terms of the side quests and the different quests that you have to take upon in the game. But the game was enjoyable enough for me to go ahead and finish it. Like I said, it took me around 23 hours. And it did take me a little bit longer than usual, because I did explore with a bunch of different classes. I was trying to be dark mage, white mage, and whatnot. So yeah, it was a pretty fun game. Now, as far as the graphics, the game wasn't really impressive at all. This game is not going to wow you with any great graphics. And one thing that I found really interesting is that the game lacks support for the 3D effect. And this is probably due to the fact that the game has a very heavy emphasis on online co-op play. So maybe sometimes when you use the 3D effect, the frame rate in games they drop, or the performance in the games drop. So it might have to do something with the online component of this game, which is something that I need to bring it up. This game has a very heavy emphasis in online play. You can play co-op with up to like 2 or 3 extra people in your party. But I do have to say that the online community, unfortunately, is pretty much dead at this point. So the good news is that the game is perfectly playable and, I guess, beatable by yourself, by playing solo. But I can see this game being a lot more fun if you have friends with you. And I actually, this takes me a little bit to the gameplay part of the game, where I was running into trouble with the last 2 missions. There were 2 missions at the very end that were very, very difficult. So I was trying to get help online, from other players, but the matchmaking was just never able to find anybody in any lobbies, to help me out. So that was a little bit frustrating having to play. Like I said, there were 1 or 2 missions that were pretty difficult playing solo. You can recruit enemies as you defeat enemies, and as you unlock items later in the game, you can actually add monsters or enemies in your own party, and it's pretty cool because they also level up and they're fighting by your side. And the AI, surprisingly, is not incredibly dumb. And when they control these AI characters, they actually attack, and they help you in defeating the enemies. And they were pretty helpful. The two monsters that I had by my side were pretty helpful for most of the game. And they level up, they become stronger and whatnot. So that was a nice touch for you to fight alongside two other monsters. It's almost like Pokemon. Basically, you have to like train and capture, and you can choose to, you can pick the monsters and enemies that you can have in your party. So that was a pretty cool touch. But as far as the difficulty overall in the game is very, very easy. And it's a little bit broken in terms of gameplay. Not broken in terms of glitches or performance, but rather on how the game gives you a time limit. You have to complete all the quests on a time, on this time frame, usually 30 minutes. Some of the earlier missions, they give you 45 minutes, an hour even sometimes, and it's pretty much ridiculous. You can finish all the quests in this game pretty fast, 10-15 minutes tops. And like I said, it's a little bit broken because if you die in the game, you take a penalty. I think it was a 5-minute penalty. But like I said, most of the missions, they give you like 45 minutes to complete. So you can gladly take that penalty, and once you take the penalty, your time gets deducted, but you still have plenty of time to defeat the bosses or all the enemies or whatever you're trying to do on your quest. It's very, very much attainable, and it's really easy because again, when you die and you take that penalty, you basically come back to life, and your health is fully replenished. I think your SP or MP power or whatever, it's also fully replenished. So there is very little challenge in the game, which is something to keep in mind. The game does have some tweaks that you can use in order to gain more XP. That does the game a little bit more difficult. I think there are options to have the enemies be a little bit tougher, or you taking more damage and whatnot. But even then, the game overall is pretty easy. And like I said, there were only like 2 missions that I have problems, and they were very late missions in the game that were pretty frustrating playing solo. But nevertheless, you can definitely get through them, especially if you level up your characters and you unlock all of the different abilities that you can also modify throughout the game to make them more powerful, and you can add elemental attributes to the abilities and whatnot. And you're able to map all the different abilities. You can have up to 8 as far as shortcuts in using the trigger buttons and whatnot. So again, I found the gameplay to be very nice, very addictive, considering you're always trying to find or unlock new abilities and try them out, and then you can create combos as you're fighting the enemies, using your regular, punches or attacks, and then, combining those with abilities, and, you recharge your MP powers, and then you have these special skills or superpowers called, I think it's called Surge, where you can summon enemies that you encase, or you can summon like characters from previous Final Fantasy games, like Cloud and Lightning and whatnot. And that's where the fan service comes in, and that's when the Final Fantasy fans are going to have like a kick out of seeing their favorite characters fight along your side. So that's about it. Final Fantasy Explorers, a very fun action RPG. If you guys are looking into getting into the Monster Hunter series, this is a very, very good place to start, because the game is not very challenging. I had a lot of fun. Like I said, the first half of the game was very addicting, everything was new. The second half, it's a lot of repetition, and that's when the game started dropping in quality. But overall, the game is short enough that you don't get to a point where you just want to stop playing the game and just quit or give up. So Final Fantasy Explorers, a pretty fun game that made it to my top games of 2016 list. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all later.